Hello, everyone. We will regularly bring you stories you like. John Miller sat at the kitchen table, his eyes scanning the pages of the Wall Street Journal. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air as sunlight streamed through the large windows of their suburban Connecticut home. His wife, Laura, moved gracefully around the kitchen, preparing breakfast for their two daughters, Ava and Emma. "Morning, sweetheart," Laura said, placing a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of him. Her voice was warm, but there was a hint of something else, something John couldn't quite place. "Morning, Laura. Thanks," John replied, looking up from his newspaper with a smile. He took a sip of his coffee, savoring the rich, bold flavor. Laura glanced at the clock on the wall. "Girls, hurry up. You'll be late for school," she called out, her tone gentle yet firm. Ava and Emma, both in their teens, appeared from the hallway, their backpacks slung over their shoulders. "Morning, Dad. Morning, Mum," they chimed in unison, grabbing their breakfast from the counter. John watched his daughters with pride. Ava, the older of the two by a year, was a straight-A student with aspirations of attending an Ivy League university. Emma, though younger, was equally ambitious and had a natural talent for art. They were the light of his life, and he was grateful for the close-knit family they had built together. As the girls hurried out the door, Laura turned to John, her expression softening. "John, we need to talk about something." John folded his newspaper and gave her his full attention. "Sure, what's on your mind?" Laura hesitated, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. "It's just, I feel like we haven't spent much time together lately. You're always so busy with work, and I have my volunteer commitments. I miss us." John reached across the table and took her hand. "I know, Laura. Things have been hectic at the office, but I'll make more of an effort. How about we plan a weekend getaway? Just the two of us?" A small smile tugged at Laura's lips. "I'd like that." With the promise of a weekend getaway, John hoped to rekindle the spark in their marriage. He knew he had been neglecting Laura, but he was determined to change that. Little did he know, a storm was brewing just beneath the surface, threatening to unravel their seemingly perfect life. After breakfast, John gathered his briefcase and kissed Laura on the cheek before heading out the door. The drive to his office was a routine he had perfected over the years, but today his thoughts were preoccupied with Laura's words. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that he was missing an important piece of the puzzle. As he pulled into the parking lot of his office building, John made a mental note to call the travel agency and book a romantic getaway for him and Laura. Maybe a weekend in the mountains or a cozy bed and breakfast by the sea would help them reconnect. He couldn't remember the last time they had taken a trip together, just the two of them, without the kids or the distractions of daily life. John's day at the office was a blur of meetings, emails, and phone calls. As the head of a successful tech firm, he was constantly juggling multiple projects and deadlines. He thrived on the challenges and the fast-paced environment, but today his heart wasn't in it. He kept thinking about Laura and the look in her eyes that morning. During a break between meetings, John called the travel agency and booked a weekend getaway at a charming bed and breakfast on Cape Cod. It was a place they had visited years ago before the kids were born, and it held special memories for both of them. He hoped it would be the perfect place to rekindle their romance and address whatever issues were bothering Laura. Back at home, Laura was busy with her daily routine. After seeing the girls off to school, she spent the morning volunteering at the local animal shelter. It was a cause close to her heart, and she found solace in caring for the abandoned and abused animals. But today, even the playful puppies and kittens couldn't lift her spirits. Laura's thoughts kept drifting back to her conversation with John. She loved him deeply, but lately she felt like they were living separate lives. He was always so busy with work, and she was consumed with her volunteer commitments and the girls' activities. They rarely had time for each other, and when they did, it felt like they were going through the motions rather than truly connecting. After her shift at the shelter, Laura met her friend Sarah for lunch. Sarah was one of the few people Laura could confide in, and she needed someone to talk to. "You look tired, Laura. Everything okay?" Sarah asked as they settled into their seats at a cozy cafe. Laura sighed. "It's John. I feel like we're drifting apart. He's always so busy with work, and I have my volunteer stuff, and the girls. We hardly spend any time together anymore." Sarah nodded sympathetically. "Have you talked to him about it?" "Yes, this morning. He promised to make more of an effort, and he even suggested a weekend getaway. But I'm not sure if that's enough. I feel like there's something missing in our relationship, and I don't know how to fix it," Laura admitted, her voice tinged with frustration. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed Laura's hand. "Maybe this getaway will help. Sometimes all it takes is a change of scenery and some quality time together to reignite the spark. Give it a chance." Laura smiled weakly. "I hope you're right." As the afternoon wore on, Laura tried to focus on her volunteer work and the girls' after-school activities, but her mind kept wandering back to her conversation with John and the nagging feeling that something was wrong. She loved her family and the life they had built together, but she couldn't shake the sense of emptiness that had settled in her heart. When John returned home that evening, he found Laura in the kitchen, preparing dinner. He walked up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pressing a kiss to her neck. "Guess what?" John said, his voice filled with excitement. "What?" Laura asked, turning to face him. "I booked us a weekend getaway at that bed and breakfast on Cape Cod. Remember the one we went to before the girls were born? I thought it would be the perfect place for us to relax and reconnect," John said, his eyes shining with hope. Laura's heart warmed at the thought of their special place. "That sounds wonderful, John. Thank you." As they sat down to dinner with Ava and Emma, John felt a renewed sense of determination to make things right with Laura. He knew they had a long road ahead, but he was willing to put in the effort to rebuild their connection and strengthen their marriage. Little did he know the challenges they would face were far greater than he could ever imagine. The charity gala was in full swing, the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton buzzing with conversation and laughter. Laura mingled effortlessly among the guests, her emerald green dress shimmering under the chandeliers. She was in her element, surrounded by influential people from the community. As she made her way to the bar, a tall, handsome man caught her eye. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his dark hair neatly combed back. Laura recognized him from the news, Richard Edwards, a prominent real estate developer known for his philanthropic efforts. "Mrs. Miller, isn't it?" Richard's voice was smooth and confident as he approached her. "Yes, that's right, and you must be Richard Edwards," Laura replied, extending her hand. "Indeed, it's a pleasure to meet you," he said, taking her hand and giving it a gentle shake. "I couldn't help but notice your remarkable presence this evening." Laura felt a blush creep up her cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. Edwards. That's very kind of you." "Please call me Richard," he insisted. "May I get you a drink?" Laura nodded, and Richard signaled the bartender. As they sipped their drinks, the conversation flowed effortlessly. Richard was charming, attentive, and genuinely interested in Laura's volunteer work. He made her feel special, something she hadn't felt in a long time. "Tell me more about your work with the animal shelter." Richard said, his eyes fixed on Laura. "It's incredibly rewarding. We rescue and rehabilitate animals that have been abandoned or abused. It's heartbreaking at times, but seeing them find loving homes makes it all worth it," Laura explained, her passion for the cause evident in her voice. Richard nodded thoughtfully. "That's truly admirable, Laura. It takes a special kind of person to dedicate themselves to such a noble cause." Laura smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her at his words. "Thank you, Richard. That means a lot." Over the next few weeks, Laura and Richard's paths crossed more frequently. They met for coffee, attended charity events together, and exchanged countless messages. What started as innocent flirtation quickly grew into something more intense. Laura found herself looking forward to their meetings, craving the attention and excitement Richard provided. Meanwhile, John remained oblivious to the growing distance between them. He was consumed by work, spending long hours at the office and traveling frequently. Laura's attempts to communicate her feelings were met with polite nods and empty promises of spending more time together. One evening, as Laura prepared dinner, her phone buzzed with a message from Richard. "Miss you, can't wait to see you tomorrow." A smile spread across her face as she typed a quick reply. "Me too? See you then?" The guilt gnawed at her, but she pushed it aside. She deserved to be happy, didn't she? Besides, it was just a harmless affair. Nothing serious. Or so she told. The next day, Laura and Richard met at their usual coffee shop. They sat in a secluded corner, their conversation flowing as easily as ever. "How's everything at home?" Richard asked, his tone casual, but his eyes searching. Laura sighed. "It's complicated. John's been busy with work, and we barely see each other. It's like we're living separate lives." Richard reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm sorry to hear that, Laura. You deserve to be happy." Laura looked into his eyes, feeling a connection she hadn't felt in years. "Thank you, Richard. I appreciate that." As the days turned into weeks, Laura and Richard's relationship deepened. They spent more time together, sharing intimate moments and confiding in each other. Laura felt alive in a way she hadn't in years, but the guilt continued to gnaw at her. One evening, as Laura was getting ready to leave for a charity event, John approached her. "Laura, can we talk?" Laura paused, her heart pounding. "Sure, John. What's on your mind?" John took a deep breath. "I've noticed you've been spending a lot of time with Richard lately. Is there something going on between you two?" Laura's stomach dropped. She hadn't expected John to confront her so directly. "John, Richard is just a friend. We work together on charity projects." John's eyes searched hers, looking for the truth. "Are you sure that's all it is, Laura?" Laura forced a smile, trying to hide her anxiety. "Yes, John, that's all it is." As she left the house, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that her double life was starting to catch up with her. She knew she had to make a choice, but the thought of losing Richard and the excitement he brought into her life was too much to bear. The charity event that evening was a blur. Laura's mind was preoccupied with thoughts of John and Richard, torn between her duty as a wife and her desire for something more. As she mingled with the guests, Richard appeared at her side, his presence both comforting and unsettling. "You seem distracted tonight," Richard observed, his voice gentle. Laura sighed. "It's just complicated. John confronted me about us. I don't know what to do." Richard took her hand, leading her to a quiet corner. "Laura, you deserve to be happy. If John can't give you that, then maybe it's time to move on." Laura looked into Richard's eyes, feeling the weight of his words. I know, but it's not that simple. We have a family, a life together. Richard cupped her face in his hands. Life is too short to be unhappy. You have to make a choice, Laura. Tears welled up in Laura's eyes as she considered Richard's words. She knew he was right, but the thought of leaving John and their family was overwhelming. She had to make a decision, but no matter what she chose, someone would get hurt. As the event came to an end, Laura left with a heavy heart. She knew she couldn't continue living a double life, but she wasn't ready to let go of Richard. She needed to find a way to balance her desires with her responsibilities, but the path forward was unclear. The following morning, Laura woke up with a sense of determination. She decided to take a break from Richard and focus on her family. She needed to see if there was still a chance to salvage her marriage with John. "John, can we talk?" Laura asked as they sat down for breakfast. John looked up from his newspaper, his expression wary. "Sure, Laura. What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking a lot about us and our relationship. I know I've been distant lately, and I'm sorry. I want to make things right," Laura said, her voice filled with sincerity. John's expression softened. "I want that too, Laura. Let's take that weekend getaway we talked about and see if we can find our way back to each other." Laura nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. "I'd like that, John. I really would." As they made plans for their trip to Cape Cod, Laura felt a sense of relief. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was willing to put in the effort to save their marriage. She hoped that with time and patience, they could rebuild the love and trust they once shared. The drive to Cape Cod was filled with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. John and Laura had decided to leave the girls with Laura's parents for the weekend, giving them some much-needed time alone. As they crossed the bridge onto the Cape, memories of their previous visits flooded Laura's mind. "Remember the first time we came here?" John asked, glancing over at Laura. Laura smiled. "Of course. We were so young and carefree. It feels like a lifetime ago." John reached over and took her hand. "Let's make some new memories this weekend." As they arrived at the bed and breakfast, they were greeted by the warm, welcoming staff. The quaint, charming inn was just as they remembered it, with its cozy rooms and picturesque views of the ocean. They settled into their room, unpacking their bags and taking a moment to appreciate the peaceful surroundings. After a leisurely walk on the beach, they returned to the inn for dinner. The dining room was intimate, with soft candlelight and the sound of waves crashing in the distance. As they sat down to eat, John and Laura made a conscious effort to reconnect. "This place is perfect, John. Thank you for bringing me here," Laura said, her eyes filled with gratitude. John smiled. "I just want us to be happy, Laura. I know I've been neglecting you, and I'm sorry. I promise to do better." Laura reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I appreciate that, John. I want to work on us too." As the evening progressed, they talked about their hopes and dreams, reminiscing about the early days of their relationship. It was a step in the right direction, but Laura couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was still missing. The next day, they spent their time exploring the quaint towns and scenic landscapes of Cape Cod. They visited art galleries, enjoyed seafood at local restaurants, and took long walks along the shoreline. It was a beautiful day, and for a while, it felt like they were back to their old selves. However, as the sun set and they returned to their room, the underlying tension began to surface. They lay in bed, the silence between them growing heavier with each passing moment. "John, do you ever feel like we're just going through the motions?" Laura asked, her voice barely above a whisper. John turned to face her, his eyes filled with concern. What do you mean? I mean, do you ever feel like something is missing in our relationship? Like we're not really connecting on a deeper level? Laura explained, her eyes searching his. John sighed, his expression pained. Sometimes, yes, but I thought this trip would help us find that connection again. Laura nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I want that too, John. I just don't know how to get there. They lay in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. The weekend getaway had been a step in the right direction, but it was clear that they still had a long way to go. Back at home, the routine resumed, and the cracks in their relationship became more apparent. John was still consumed by work, and Laura found herself slipping back into her daily routines, feeling the same sense of emptiness and dissatisfaction. One evening, as John sat in his study, reviewing reports for an upcoming project, Laura entered the room. She hesitated at the door before speaking. John, I need to go out for a bit. There's a last-minute meeting with the charity board, she said, avoiding his gaze. John looked up from his papers, his brow furrowed. Another meeting? You've been having a lot of those lately. Laura's eyes flickered with irritation. It's important, John. We have a big fundraiser coming up. All right, John said, his tone resigned. Just be careful. As Laura left the house, John couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He trusted Laura, but her frequent absences were becoming harder to ignore. Later that night, as John prepared for bed, he noticed Laura's phone buzzing on the nightstand. Glancing at the screen, he saw a message from Richard. Can't stop thinking about you. John's heart sank. He picked up the phone, his hands trembling. The messages between Laura and Richard painted a clear picture of their relationship. The flirtatious exchanges, the secret meetings, it was all there. When Laura returned home, John confronted her. Who's Richard? He demanded, holding up her phone. Laura's face went pale. John, I can explain. Explain what? That you've been cheating on me? John's voice was filled with a mix of anger and hurt. Tears welled up in Laura's eyes. I'm sorry, John. I never meant for this to happen. John turned away, his mind racing. The life they had built together was crumbling before his eyes. He couldn't believe that the woman he loved, the mother of his children, had betrayed him. The days that followed were a blur of arguments, tears, and sleepless nights. Laura moved out of the house, taking refuge with Richard. John was left to pick up the pieces, struggling to come to terms with the betrayal. At work, John tried to maintain a facade of normalcy, but his colleagues noticed the change in him. He was quieter, more withdrawn, and often lost in thought. His boss, Mr. Thompson, called him into his office one afternoon. John, is everything all right? You've been off lately? Mr. Thompson said, his tone filled with concern. John sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's personal, Mr. Thompson. My wife. She's left me. Mr. Thompson's expression softened. I'm sorry to hear that, John. If you need some time off, we can arrange that. John shook his head. No, I need to keep busy. It's the only thing keeping me sane right now. Back at home, John tried to distract himself with his hobbies. He spent hours organizing his coin collection and going on geocaching adventures. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape the pain of Laura's betrayal. One evening, as John was sorting through his coins, Ava and Emma approached him. Dad, can we talk? Ava asked, her voice hesitant. John looked up, his heart aching at the sight of his daughter's worried faces. Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind? Emma sat down next to him, tears in her eyes. We miss Mom, Dad. We don't understand why she left. John's heart broke as he pulled his daughters into a tight embrace. "I know, girls. I miss her too, but sometimes things happen that we can't control. All we can do is try to move forward." As the weeks passed, John began to notice the cracks in Laura and Richard's relationship. Rumors of Richard's questionable business practices and affairs with other women started to surface. Laura, once so confident in her decision to leave John, began to doubt herself. Laura's life with Richard was not as perfect as she had imagined. The initial excitement and passion had faded, replaced by arguments and suspicion. Richard was often away on business trips, leaving Laura alone in his luxury apartment. One evening, as Laura sat alone, her phone buzzed with a call from Ava. "Mom, can we talk?" Laura's heart ached at the sound of her daughter's voice. "Of course, sweetheart. What's wrong?" Ava's voice was filled with sadness. "We miss you, Mum. Dad's trying his best, but it's not the same without you." Tears welled up in Laura's eyes. "I miss you too, Ava. I'll come to see you soon, I promise." After hanging up, Laura sat in silence, her mind racing. She had left John for a life she thought would make her happy, but all she felt was emptiness. She missed her family, her home, and the life they had built together. Meanwhile, John was slowly beginning to rebuild his life. He reconnected with old friends and threw himself into his work and hobbies. He even started attending a support group for people going through divorce, finding solace in the shared experiences of others. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, John received a call from Laura. "John, can we meet? I need to talk to you." John's heart skipped a beat. "Sure, Laura. When and where?" They agreed to meet at a local coffee shop the next day. As John walked in, he saw Laura sitting at a corner table, looking more vulnerable than he had ever seen her. "Hi, John," Laura said softly, her eyes filled with regret. "Hi, Laura," John replied, sitting down across from her. "What's on your mind?" Laura took a deep breath, her voice trembling. "I made a mistake, John, leaving you, leaving our family. It was the biggest mistake of my life." John's heart ached at her words, but he remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "Richard, he's not the man I thought he was. He's involved in some shady business deals, and I don't trust him anymore. I miss you, John. I miss our life together," Laura admitted, tears streaming down her face. John reached across the table and took her hand. "I miss you too, Laura, but things can't just go back to the way they were. We need to rebuild trust, and that will take time." Laura nodded, her eyes filled with hope. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes, John. I want us to be a family again." John and Laura began the slow and painful process of rebuilding their relationship. They attended counseling sessions and had long, honest conversations about their feelings and mistakes. It wasn't easy, but they were both committed to making it work. One day, as John was going through his old coin collection, he found a rare coin that reminded him of the early days of their marriage. He decided to give it to Laura as a symbol of their renewed commitment to each other. "Laura, I want you to have this," John said, handing her the coin. Laura looked at the coin, her eyes filling with tears. "Thank you, John. This means so much to me." As they continued to work on their relationship, John and Laura began to rediscover the things they loved about each other. They spent more time together as a family, and slowly the wounds of the past began to heal. Just as John and Laura were starting to rebuild their life together, a new challenge emerged. Richard was under investigation for fraud and money laundering, and Laura was unknowingly implicated in his illegal activities. One evening, John received a call from Laura, her voice filled with panic. John, the police are at my door. They say I'm involved in Richard's crimes. What should I do? John's heart raced. Stay calm, Laura. I'll be right there. When John arrived at Laura's apartment, he found her in tears, surrounded by police officers. Officer, there's been a mistake. Laura had no knowledge of Richard's activities, John said, trying to remain calm. The lead officer nodded. We'll need her to come down to the station for questioning. John held Laura's hand as they followed the officers to the police station. During the questioning, Laura explained that she had no involvement in Richard's business dealings and had left him as soon as she realized the truth. After hours of questioning, Laura was finally released. As they walked out of the station, John turned to her. We'll get through this, Laura. Together. With the legal troubles behind them, John and Laura focused on their future. They sold their old house and bought a new one, a fresh start for their renewed commitment to each other. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their new home, Laura turned to John. Thank you for standing by me, John. I don't know what I would have done without you. John smiled, his heart filled with love for the woman he had once lost. We're a team, Laura. We'll always stand by each other. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over their home, John and Laura knew that their love had been tested and had emerged stronger than ever. They had faced betrayal, heartbreak, and uncertainty, but they had also found forgiveness, healing, and a renewed sense of hope. The future was uncertain, but they were ready to face it together, hand in hand, as a family once more. If you like our stories, please subscribe to our channel so that I can push better stories to you.